Hi guys, I'm Rochelle and I'm a Ravenclaw, and today I'm here to tell you all about everything that I read in the month of September. I am so sorry that this wrap up is so late. I film using natural lighting and it's spring where I live, and spring tends to be a very rainy season. So lighting has not been great, nor has my motivation to film this wrap up been high. But we should just get straight to it. So in the month of September I managed to finish a total of 9 things. I also participated in the hashtag ISATRAT readathon, which is run by my lovely friend Sam from Sam's Nonsense. I will leave her link all down below. I will mention when I get to the readathon here. I'm not going to make a dedicated wrap up for it or anything. So the first thing that I read in the month of September was a graphic novel. I read Sunstone Volume 1 by, I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce this wrong guys, Stjepan Sejic. I read that just to give myself a break because August was ARC August and I read a bunch of things and was really struggling with the last ARC that I was reading. You'll hear about that very shortly. So I read Sunstone, which is a graphic novel about 2 young women exploring a BDSM relationship. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I had some thoughts about some things that occurred in it, so both of these characters were drawn with very similar body types. They both had very large breasts and, stereotypical, superhero attractiveness levels, which I was very frustrated with because that felt more like fetishizing, and because they're 2 women, it was also a little. And the other concern that I had with Sunstone was that there is a moment in the story where one of the characters is embarrassed, and to combat that, another character reveals a deeply embarrassing story, not only about themselves, but about one of the other characters present, without her knowledge or consent that he was going to do this. And as they are both described as people with high social awkwardness and anxiety, I felt that that was not handled very well or in a way that I was comfortable with. So those are particularly my issues. And also, the author being a male and writing about 2 women engaging in BDSM. I'm not saying he can't write that, but it did feel a little weird. But overall, I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the more positive representation that BDSM got from Sunstone. The next thing that I managed to finish was Equilibrium by C.S. Seeley. I ended up giving this 2 stars. This was my ARC leftover from ARC August. This book was something like 680 pages long, and there was nothing particularly wrong with it. There were some really interesting ideas and topics discussed, and to balance that out, there was also some not great writing or character development. And while I appreciate the author writing this as a standalone fantasy novel, which can be extremely tough and very unusual for the fantasy genre, I feel like it could have done with some more polish. And this was originally released as episodic content, so you got I think this had 5 or 6 parts, so you got a part every week or every month. I don't remember what the release schedule was like. But this story follows 2 warring kingdoms. They've both been the ruling kingdom in an empire at some point, and they're basically fighting it out. Neither of them believes that the other one will be content with just their space, so they are consistently working to defend themselves and their kingdom from each other's attacks. There is also a magic system in this where there are 12 people with 6 different types of magic. Each side is meant to have one opposing magician, and things kick off when one magician turns to the other side. There is a lot that I would discuss with this novel. It had some really interesting ideas. I just don't think it was executed as well as it could have been, and therefore that was why I gave it 2 stars. This book also took me like 3 weeks to read, 4 weeks to read. Like it was very slow going. It was very arduous. The next book that I read in the month of September was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I listened to this in audiobook, and this is a retelling of the Trojan War and Achilles' role in it. It follows Achilles and Patroclus from a very young age, and it takes a closer look at their relationship and whether they were friends or potentially something more. I really enjoyed this. This was recommended several times as an audiobook, and while I didn't get the break your heart bawling that people had told me to expect, I did still really enjoy this. I felt the characterization was really cool, and the time and setting felt very authentic. I'm not particularly well versed on the time or the setting, but I feel like Madeline Miller did her research. I ended up giving this one also 4 stars. I am definitely going to picking up Circe when it gets released, but yeah, I really enjoyed this and would recommend. The next book that I finished in the month of September is The Magician's Land by Lev Grossman. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. This is the last book in a trilogy, so I can't tell you too much about the events that were going on in here. The story follows Quentin Coldwater, who at the age of 17 discovers that he has magic, and he goes to Brakebills, which is a magical college, and discovers that while being an arrogant 17-year-old that magic is dangerous and it does have consequences, and this continues to deal with some of the consequences from the first. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very clever. This is Lev Grossman's examination on the Chronicles of Narnia, so if you know generally how Narnia goes, you can see the elements that he used or chose to change in this story. I really enjoyed the conclusion to this novel. I thought that there was slightly more that could have been investigated and dealt with, particularly in regards to one particular character who we didn't really see much of. There was a lot that I wanted a little bit more fleshed out in the end, particularly in regards to the in-between lands and where everyone ended up. There is a character introduced in this called Plum, I believe her name is, who I did really enjoy, but I felt that her story was brought into this, and I feel the same way about Narnia. Her story was brought into this, and as such other stories were sacrificed or not elaborated on. I did really enjoy this, but I just wanted slightly more from it. I had a serious struggle with this series in particular. I don't know if it's just Lev Grossman's writing style or the characters themselves, but I have a mild emotional disconnect, which I don't normally experience, and therefore I don't think some of the things that happened in this impacted me as much as I think they were supposed to. The emotional disconnect here is definitely part of why my rating is not 5 stars. And it was at this point in the month where I participated in #ISATRAP. So I managed to complete all of the official challenges. I did set myself a personal challenge because at the time I was also listening to an audiobook and I wanted to complete a page of colouring. I didn't manage to finish that up just because of like personal and mental health reasons. I had like a series of very anxious days where I couldn't focus very well. The first thing that I read during I Sat Rat was Pretty Deadly Volume 1 by Kelly Sue DeConnick. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I don't know, again, if it's the writer or whether it's the writer's choice of artist or art style, but I have a really hard time with Kelly Sue's works, particularly with graphic novels. I need that instant, yes, this is a story for me, and I never seem to find that with the first volumes of her work. I don't know if that would change if I picked up further issues into it, or whether this author and I just wouldn't get along. Pretty Deadly follows the story of a young girl and her friend as they travel around like the Old West, pursued by a servant or messenger of death. I felt a lot of it progressed very rapidly. I would like to have spent more time getting to know a lot of the characters, because just like the sacrifices would be more impactful, and like I feel like volume 1 is a complete story, and I don't know if this is like a graphic novel short story series, but if they were to return to this setting and world and these characters, I don't know where else they could take this story. Like, we end very definitively. I just don't know where else they could take this, and yeah, I felt everything about this progressed very rapidly. I wasn't a huge fan of the art. I struggled with some of the art because of the style ended up making things very cluttered, and it wasn't clear which panels followed which and whose speech bubbles you were meant to read and in what order. I will probably pick up one more thing by Kelly Sue and then probably not pick up anything else by her if I don't enjoy that. So the next thing that I read during I Sat Rat is City of Thieves by David Benioff. I gave this 4 stars. This is quite short. This is just over 300 pages, I think like 310. This story follows 2 young men as they have to recover a dozen eggs for the NKVD lieutenant's daughter's wedding cake. If they don't manage to recover these, then they will be shot for crimes they have committed. As you can expect with a World War II novel, this covers some very dark and taboo topics, as well as the whole Jewish racism thing. Like, you all know, you all understand war is a bad time. But I really enjoyed the pinches of humor that the author managed to sprinkle throughout this. It wasn't just like very monotone and dark and depressing the way that a lot of World War II novels can be. Because of the length of this book, I really struggled with closure for a lot of the characters. Like, one particular character where I'm being very nondescript to make sure that this is not spoiled for you, but we're in a scene with a character and it's very rapidly paced and there are consequences from this scene, but for whatever reason this is the final scene that we see that character in, and then we don't get any more closure about that character. And maybe it's just my general fantasy reading background, but I've been taught to expect certain things when it comes to situations like that, where you hear about what happened with the character more, even like from a third count of a person talking to a person talking to a person. So I struggled with accepting the consequences and like letting them have the emotional impact that they could have had. The next thing that I read for I Sat Rat was The Shadow's Heart by KJ Taylor. I also gave this 4 stars. This is the final book in the Risen Sun trilogy by KJ Taylor. Again, because this is the final book, I can't really tell you too much about this, but this series follows Layla, who is a peasant girl who is chosen to be a companion to a griffin, which is a very big status symbol, and if you're chosen by a griffin then you are immediately risen to nobility. There is a civil war going on between 2 houses in this series and we get the final resolution of this. This book is about 500 pages. I feel like this could have been split into another 2 books and this could have been a quartet. I feel like the author definitely left enough strings loose where we could potentially be getting another series in this world following like secondary characters. My main issues with this story were I felt that there were certain decisions made by characters in this that was completely out of tune with who I knew them to be as characters, and there wasn't really a lot of explanation or build up to the pressure of them making this decision. So I really struggled to believe certain decisions made by these characters as decisions that they would have made, and as a result I struggled to keep my suspension of disbelief and let the story go where it was to go. The second issue that I had with this book is an issue that I feel like I appreciated more in the first book, when Layla was still like a peasant girl that had been recently transformed into a noble. Her political maneuvering abilities, especially like over the course of the series, should have developed, and I felt like a lot of that had been trimmed down or trimmed out so that there was a lot more telling than showing. Like a lot of her reasonings, etc., behind decisions that she was making were explained in very straightforward terms. Like she would be talking about secret plans and she wouldn't try and be subtle about it or like anything other than blunt whatsoever. Like if she wanted you to do something, she would just come right up to you and be like, you need to do this for these reasons. And as a consequence, like particularly because I read things like Game of Thrones, where a lot of the political machinations have very severe rapid consequences from just the turn of a phrase, and you learn things about characters by the way that you phrase them. I felt like she should have grown a little bit more in that regard, particularly in the situation that she was in. Otherwise, there would have been more consequences much earlier than there were consequences. So I really enjoyed the series and I will be checking out more of KJ Taylor's stuff. So those were all 3 things that I managed to finish during the iSatRat readathon. There were 2 more things that I managed to finish in the month of September. The second last being The Red Knight by Miles Cameron. I also gave this 4 stars. I feel like I made a slight error in this novel by listening to the audiobook. I really enjoyed the world building and the character development and everything about this, but this series follows, I would say, maybe 10 or 12 different viewpoints, and there really, for some of them, wasn't a lot to differentiate who they were. And some of the names were French, some of the names were Gaelic, some of the names were ye old Engly, like Sir Gwen or something. So I really struggled to keep an idea of who was who and where they were and what they were doing that was potentially relevant to other viewpoints that we were also getting. This series follows a mercenary band as they are hired to protect an abbey from invasion by the Wilds, which is a large like wood or forest surrounding all the edges of several kingdoms with its own magic system, and the Wild is trying to reabsorb and re-engulf the kingdom that these people are currently living in. If you enjoyed Uprooted, I would definitely take a look at this series and see if it's something that you could be interested in. There were several points where I was confused about whether I had missed something while listening to the audiobook and they'd already explained like a character development, or if it was like teasing and foreshadowing, which is not great. But again, that might be because I listened to the audiobook. Maybe I would have gotten more out of this if I had read it. I am definitely planning to pick up the rest of this series, and I do really enjoy the covers. I think the final book has just been announced and all the covers are going to match, which I'm very excited about. And the final thing that I managed to finish in the month of September was The Gathering Storm by Kate Elliott. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. This is the 5th book in a 7-book series. Again, I can't really tell you too much about it because it is so late in the series, but know that this series follows, again, multiple points of view, but with 2 very main protagonists, one by the name of Alan, one by the name of Leah. There's a prophecy or something of that nature. That means that these 2 main characters, while they have humble origins, will be the deciding factor in the fate of the world. There has been an event talked about since the beginning of the series that finally occurred in this book. The anticipation was killing me. It occurred at the very end of the book, so I know that the next 2 books will be dealing with the fallout from that event. My main issue with this is it's over 1,000 pages, the font is not very big, and there were several character viewpoints that I felt could have been removed entirely. Like, this book needed to be seriously edited or just cut into 2 books. This book took me so long to finish. It was such a struggle. It was definitely an uphill battle. I very seriously considered putting this down and then coming back to it at a later time, but if I did that, I knew I would forget like a lot of small but key details that maybe don't have huge amount of significance now but will play larger roles later. So I did manage to power through this. I've already started the next book in this series. You'll see more about that in my October wrap-up, but the font is significantly larger and have already read about 120 pages. I definitely feel like this was the low point and that this could have used like another serious editing. So that was all 9 things that I managed to finish in the month of September. I would love to know how your reading month went in September. Please feel free to leave a comment down below. If you have read any of these or have any thoughts on any of these things, I would love to hear from you again down below. I will see you again very shortly for the first wrap-up for the month of October. I participated in the #GetGraphicReadathon and I read a lot of graphic novels, so you guys will be seeing a separate wrap-up of that from my October wrap-up, which should be going up very shortly, I hope. I hope you guys are having a magical day. Bye!